You arrive just as the light thins to pewter and the village draws itself small against the cold. The air is stiff with frost. It snaps at your lungs like a reprimand. You would like to think of yourself as hardy, but one medieval winter night will measure you more honestly than any gym gadget or motivational slogan ever could. Tonight, there are no radiators, no double glazing, no rescue by the boiler's stubborn rattle. There is you, a drafty cottage, a mean fire, and the long, long dark. The cottage is wattle-and-daub under a shag of thatch, low enough that you could rest a palm on the rafters if you dared stand on the bed. The door complains in its hinges. A cat slips past your ankle, a streak of bone and fluff on important business. Inside, the world smells of smoke that never quite escapes of wool that has seen too much weather, of onions hanging like paper lanterns, and a ham bone that is mostly memory. Your eyes prickle at once. The smoke does that, and it will keep doing it until you sleep. You learn quickly or not at all. Before night has you by the throat, there are tasks. They're not optional. They're the difference between shivering through to dawn and failing quietly in the dark. First, the beasts. The goat must be coaxed inside, not because the family fancies a barn in the bedroom, but because her heat is part of the night's arithmetic. 2 chickens are already up on the beam heads, tucked grumbling as you pass. You copy what you see: a scatter of straw, a twist of rags shoved into a gap that whistles like a flute. The shutter dragged tight against a sky going slate blue. Your clothes are wrong for this. That lovely modern fleece, forget it. You're handed layers that are scratchy, honest and compromised linen, close to the skin, a woolen tunic over that hose, a cap that makes you look faintly ridiculous but saves your ears, and a cloak that smells of last week's weather. None of it fastens with convenience. Laces, pins, and habit hold everything together, and every edge leaks heat. The curfew bell is not a siren of fear, as you might imagine, not here at any rate. It is a reminder: cover the fire before the town sleeps. Couvre-feu, someone mutters. You don't know the French, but you understand the point. Fire is warmth, yes, but fire is how a street becomes a cinder when a gust takes a spark and runs it along the eaves. You feel the weight of that knowledge the way a modern feels the click of a seatbelt. The bell makes its last patient note, and then there's nothing but the hush of snow starting somewhere you can't see. Food is not a course, it's a strategy. Tonight it is pottage, a pot that never really empties, thickened with whatever came to hand. Barley, a parsnip cabbage that has faced the air too many times. A sliver of salted pork from the bone that dangles like a warning to be careful. Black bread leans against the pot, dark as a sermon and twice as dense. You drink small beer, weaker than you expect, because clean water is a kind of miracle, and no one trusts miracles to last. The beer warms as it goes down. For a moment your courage is larger than your breath. The hearth sits shallow and smoky under a hood that sulks at pulling draft. Wet wood hisses, green wood sulks. Only seasoned logs behave, and they're precious. If you're in the fen country, the fuel is peat crumbly bricks that smolder low, more smoke than flame. Smoke is not the enemy here. Smoke is part of the plan. It scours to an extent. It tells fleas and other hangers-on that this body is defended. The price is a cough that scratches up the back of your throat like a cat behind a curtain. You study the bed, and the bed studies you. It isn't a bed as you've known the word. It is a palliasa sacking stuffed with straw that rustles like dry leaves any time you breathe with enthusiasm. The straw is changed when it must be, not when it ought. A blanket of coarse wool waits on top, and perhaps a pelt if fortune has been kind this season. The family will sleep in a stack elders, where the draught sneaks least a child bundled nearest the embers visitors where there's still floor. You think of the mattress at home with numbers to dial and toppers to temper. Then you put the thought aside before it can make you petulant. You are taught to bank the fire. Not to put it out, that would be madness, but to tuck it in. A bed of embers is made like a secret hoard. Ash is pulled over the glow not too tight. The aim is a slow, sulking heat that will last the night without throwing sparks at the thatch. There's a hot stone too hauled from the hearth with a stick wrapped in rags, tucked near the foot of the bed where your toes become a pair of questions. If the stone hisses, you've done something foolish with water. If it cracks, you've got a story no one wants to repeat. You can still escape, you think. You could flee back to your century with its switches and sealed windows. The thought is a luxury you don't say aloud. Here night is not something you scroll through. It is something that happens to you, and you prepare the way sailors prepare for weather. You check the shutter latch again. You wedge a rag into a crack you missed. You move the bucket closer because you will not want to go out when the hour is cruel and the ground glass hard. The cat returns and sits on your feet as if awarding a medal. Conversation is not chatter. It's practical poetry. A list of things to remember and things to be thankful for. Who'll wake to tend the embers? Who's coughing? Which neighbor's roof looks heavy with snow and might need a knock in the morning? A story is told because that is what you do at the seam between day and night. A bishop who lost his way in a blizzard and found it by following a cow's breath. A winter when the well sang like a bell. You listen not quite believing and believe more than you meant to when the wind worries the thatch with a hand made of knives. You learn about segmented sleep as if it were an old friend. First sleep will take you less than an hour after the last spoon scrapes the pot. Second sleep will come towards dawn if the embers hold and the baby fusses softly rather than loudly, and the goat decides not to practice her scale of complaints. Between the two, it will be your turn to sit up, poke the ashes, turn the stone, and hum to the dark to convince it to keep its distance. It sounds like ritual because it is one. It is the quiet, ordinary religion of staying alive. The cold presses at the door again, polite but insistent. You pull your cap lower. Your breath makes a ghost in front of you. The cottage creaks a sentence you can't translate and doesn't repeat. Out in the field, something moves, fox perhaps, or a poor sod who left the alehouse too late and is learning about consequences. You lie down and the straw resists, then accepts you prickly but faithful. Someone's feet find your calves. You flinch. Then you understand that this is how warmth behaves shared or lost. The wool blanket is heavier than it looks and less helpful than you want, but it is a promise and promises matter here. The embers wink under their ash like an old dog refusing to sleep. Your eyes sting, then soften. Your ears catalogue every sound into harmless. and not yet known. If you sleep, it will be because you have agreed a treaty with the cold and the smoke. If you don't, it will be because you are still expecting the night to care about your expectations. Either way, the first test is coming, the hour when the fire slackens, the air bites, and your choices begin. You surface as if from deep water. Heart, oddly loud, eyes gritty with smoke and sleep. The first waking has its own sound, not a bell or a shout, but the particular silence a room makes when heat is giving up. It's the hush of wool cooling on skin, the tiny tick of rafters, the goat's thoughtful sigh, the breath of the person beside you turning thin and fast for a moment before settling. The embers are failing. This is your watch. You try to move without losing the heat you've banked with your own body. The trick is to fold the blanket back as little as possible and keep your cap on. Cap off heat leaves the room through your head as if you'd opened the door. Your feet find the floor and jerk away. The earth is stone cold, and the straw under the palliasse keeps its own frost. You aim for the shoes you left within reach, except you didn't. First mistake and it bites. You shuffle in stockinged feet, teeth setting up a quiet argument with one another. The hearth looks innocent, which is to say, dangerous. No blaze, just a dark plate of ash with the odd, sullen orange eye buried inside. Do not panic and do not fuss. Panicking people drown fires with their goodwill. You take the poker if you have one or a blackened stick, and you draw a small circle in the ash to expose one bright seed of heat. If there's no poker, you use the split of a log narrow end first. You don't rake everything bare. That's the second common mistake. Too much air, too fast. Embers scattered like coins, nothing concentrated enough to catch. You reach for your breath-warming trick. It is simple, and it matters. You take the edge of your cloak or a square of linen if you're fancy, and make a little tent over your mouth and nose. You breathe in and out steadily, letting the cloth trap and temper the air before it meets your lungs. Cold air straight in makes your chest tight and steals more heat than any window crack. Warm it, calm it. The same tent will serve your hands. You blow into your cupped palms under the cloth until they change from stone to skin again. Now coax the embers. Lift a cowpat of ash off the live core and lay it to one side like a lid you might want again. A dry twig or two, no thicker than your little finger, set carefully on the glow. Do not throw. Do not heap. Do not add a log, because you are impatient and want drama. Logs are for when there is already fire. Right now, you are teaching a child to walk. You lean close and send a thin stream of air, not a gale across the embers. Breathe from your warmed lungs through pursed lips, a quiet hiss that turns orange to gold and then white. There one twig catches, then another. You add slivers, not sticks. Kindling is patience in wood form. The cottage wakes with you. Smoke curls from the faint flame and licks the hood. It will go mostly where it should if the wind outdoors is kind. If the wind has veered, the smoke will come down and sit in your lap like a bad-tempered cat. Don't flap it with your cloak, that just breaks your warmth and stirs sparks. You wait it out, eyes watering, remembering that smoke is half a blanket for this room, keeping fleas and worse from holding a feast. If someone coughs, you damp the burning edge with a pinch of ash, not water. Water hisses, splutters, and can spit a koala. Foolish third mistake when thatch is a dry throat above your head. You turn the hot stone at the foot of the bed with a rag you warmed beneath your cloak. The stone hoards heat at its core. Turning it lets that heart out. Put it back wrong bare to skin, and you will raise a blister to remember. People have stories about the burn that looks like a coin. They show the scar at ale time and laugh. They didn't laugh when it happened. The chamber pot tempts you. Outside is a sky made of knives, and the ground is glass. Still dragging the pot too close to the hearth is another of the small mistakes that sour a night heat makes. Smells leap, accidents happen. Ash likes to explore. If you must, you keep it on the far side, steady your hand, and thank whoever put straw down earlier. Another lesson plan for the version of you who will be clumsy and half-blind later. Night magnifies error. You test the shutters, but do not open them. A curious hand is a heat thief. A lifted latch is a wind gate. People have cracked the window a finger's width to let smoke out and let the night in, and the night never leaves without taking something. Instead, you listen the soft hiss, that means snow is falling. The deeper hush, that means it's lying. The rare hard pelting, that means something nastier is at work. You hear none of those tonight. Good. Someone stirs a child, whimpering a cough from an old man in the corner. You go to the bed and learn another winter lesson: breath warming can be shared. You make a cave with the blanket edge and your cloak so the child can breathe what you breathe for a minute, not the room's knife air. It settles them. It eases you. The village knows this trick without naming it. It is taught knee to knee and never written down. You remember belatedly to angle your body sideways to the fire as you tend it. Face first is a mistake. You cook your cheeks dry, your eyes, and sweat into your clothes, which then chill you to the bone when you return to bed. Damp wool is treachery. Keep your body dry. You'll earn warmth, not borrow it against a bill that comes due at 3 in the morning. The fire has a flame now, small and honest. You could feed it too much because you're proud. Don't. Heat in this room is an account you balance. A greedy blaze will steal fuel from dawn. A sulky ember will leave you all teeth and misery before second sleep. Find the middle, a palm's width of kindling, a split stick as thick as a thumb, then ash over to mute the light and keep the heart. A night fire is not for spectacle, it is for survival. You manage not to knock the poker so it clatters. You do not leave it buried in the coals, like a trap for your own foot later, yet another of the small errors that brand people as fools. You set it where your sleepy hand can't mistake hot for cold. You tuck the cloak back around the sleeper to your left because they shifted while you were at the hearth. Night is a set of quiet courtesies. You keep people warm or you lose them. For a moment, you consider stepping outside just to breathe a cleaner breath. You picture the doors thunk the gasp, as air bites your throat, the instant ache in your teeth, the way your wet eyes would try to freeze shut. You think of the goat, curious slipping past your knee, bolting for some idea of grass. You let the picture pass. A winter night rewards imaginations that stay indoors. Back under the blanket, you learn the last lesson of first waking. Go to sleep as you would go to sea line and gear ready. Your shoes now point towards the hearth. The rag for the stone is where your hand expects it. The kindling is stacked, not strewn. The bucket is far. The cap is tight. You turn your face to the warm breath cave you've made with your cloak, and you let the night be the size of the hearth. No larger, no smaller. Somewhere in the thatch, a soft crumble of frost slides and stops. The fire ticks. Your chest loosens because you have done what can be done. You fold yourself back into the straws, crackle into the shared heats. Honest wait, and the dark agrees to leave you alone, for now. The dark doesn't keep its bargain for long. You wake again with the particular unease that means nothing is exactly wrong yet, but something is leaning that way. The air has changed its mind. What was merely cold is now clammy, as if the night has put a damp hand on your face. Somewhere outside, the wind has veered, and the cottage answers with a long, low groan through the rafters. The first you notice is the smell. Smoke, yes, but muddled now with a raw wetness, the scent of thawed thatch and damp daub. You lift your cap a finger's width and regret it at once. Your hairline beads with chill sweat from the roof, and that little streak of water runs down your temple as if the cottage had licked you. This is what the old woman meant when she said, "When the thatch sweats, keep your counsel and your ash." The frost that stiffened the straw has softened. Melt has begun not kindly, but in sly drips that find the seam of your blanket and creep. Freezing fog, the East Coast folk call it a hearth, come in on the change of wind. You can't see it, but you can feel its manners. It noses through the wall's smallest gossip hole, pries at the shutter, where the hinge is proud, and sits heavy under the hood, so the smoke refuses to rise. A downdraught presses the room like a thumb on a beetle. Your eyes sting, the cat sneezes, the goat's breath shows in quick white puffs, as if she counting to keep brave. You go to the hearth and crouch sideways, keeping your front from the flames. The fire is alive, but in the wrong way, sullen and thick, wanting to crawl outwards rather than climb. This is the dangerous mood. If you stir it hard, it will throw sparks. If you baby it, it will sulk into black. You do the plain thing first, lift off the blanket of ash to find the red core, then lay fine sticks like a lattice, giving them a little alley for air. Your breath-warming cloth becomes a bellows again, a measured thread of air, not a gust. The flame answers, but the hood coughs it back. Smoke rolls down and curls around your knees like a bad-tempered dog. Here is where plans fray. A tired hand wants the easy solution. Open the shutter just a crack to let the room draw. You know better. That crack will drink the heat like a drunk at a christening. And if the wind's wrong, it will shove more fog in than smoke out. Instead, you try the hearth's own cure for sulks. You feed it a trickle of truly dry kindling, thin obedient, the sort that snaps when you bend it, and you wait for the small, honest flame that persuades rather than bullies. Sometimes a candle held near the hood's mouth will coax the draft to behave. You haven't a candle to waste. You settle for patience, which costs nothing but feels dear at this hour. Drip, Another cold coin lands, this time on your wrist. You look up by reflex and blink grit from your eyes as the smoke picks its moments. The thatch is weeping from a seam above the crossbeam. Each tear chooses the same path, which at least is a kindness. You can catch a habit easier than chaos. You fetch the spare rag you kept for the hot stone and tie it to the beam with a scrap of twine, letting a corner hang like the tongue of an old dog. It becomes a wick, catching each drip and sending it down itself into a bowl you place on a stool. This is not refinement, merely a truce. The roof will rain. You will say where. Someone shifts on the palliasse, and you hear the little sound that means a blanket has found its damp. A wet blanket is treachery twice, heavy now, freezing later. You lift the edge, turn it, and tuck the dry side down quick as you can, without losing the room's small store of warmth. If there were a testera cloth canopy, you would draw it. But a poor house wears its roof inside as it is. You make do with a cloak hung like a sail between bed and drip, a flimsy wall that makes a difference out of proportion to its weight. The goat offended by the fog's cold finger stamps and noses for the hearth. You block her gently with your shin. That is another sort of mistake. This hour invites the beast that decides to warm itself at the very place that will scold it, kick sparks, tip the pot, and turn your careful night into an argument with fire. You bribe her with a handful of straw, crisp sweet, the good end of the bundle, and she resettles with a grumble that sounds like an old reeve agreeing under protest. The chamber pot is no friend now. Damp thickens smell, heat lifts it. You edge it further off, trying not to make more noise than the cottage can forgive. A poker skitters where you left it safe in the small hours. That would have been a branded foot if fatigue had its way. You set the iron back with the deliberate care of a man placing a blade. You turn the hot stone again with the rag you warmed against your chest. The heat lingers stubbornly in its heart. You share that small good news by moving it to the coldest set of toes. The person there makes a sound like a prayer or a curse, one syllable, grateful either way. You're learning the craft of keeping a promise to strangers while you share their bed, the quiet choreography of turning, tucking, lending breath, and pretending not to notice the part of yourself that wants out. Another drip. The ragwick shines. You empty the bowl into the ash outside the hearth, not on the coals, never on the coals, and set it back as if you believed in the ritual. Perhaps you do. A little order in the middle of a veering night is not superstition. It is a life jacket. The fog chews at the hood again. You give the fire the smallest luxury. You have a sliver of the seasoned log you saved because it felt like hoarding summer. You lay it not on the flame, but above it, bridging two modest sticks, so heat will kiss its underside and persuade it to catch without sulking. Slowly and then properly it does. The flame stands up straighter. The smoke grudges you and slides up sullen but beaten. You think of the door. You think of the square of night beyond it, and the sound the snow makes when it falls from a low roof. A muffled body-sized thud that has made men jump into their own deaths when they had other worries in their minds. The thatch sheds its thaw in sheets sometimes, and the weight of it at the wrong angle can shift the world. You put your hand to the latch and then take it away. The old man across the room shifts again and coughs with that hard iron cough that says his chest is as old as the harvest. You make the breath tent for him a moment, your cloak a small cave to lend him warmth he can own as his own. Time dilates. This is the long hour before dawn, the scullion of hours mean and necessary. Your thoughts are clumsy from interrupted sleep. This is when people forget the little rules. They bank a flame too tight and wake to black teeth. They feed it too bold and wake to a scorched beam. They chase clean air and lose all the warm they had left. They pull the blanket the wrong way and lay damp side to skin. They leave the pot by the hearth. They step on iron. They trust the goat. So you do what the careful. Do you say each thing in your head and put it where it belongs? Poker, cold side out, pot far, rag at hand, cap down, cloak dry, kindling stacked, stone turned, drip caught, shoes pointing. The list is your hedge against the fog that has crept into your thoughts as surely as into the room. And still the wet makes itself known. Your lashes feel heavy. Your breath comes shallow, so you make the cloth cave and breathe through it until your chest remembers how. The thatch mutters. The bowl plinks. The flame whispers like someone reading in the next room. The dark beyond the shutter fades by a shade you think you imagined, then returns, then fades again, as if dawn were practicing and not yet brave enough to show its face. When it comes, it will not rescue you, not at once. Dawn in winter is a pale coin that buys very little to begin with. The fog will dull it. The roof will drip more before it stops. The room will feel colder for knowing day is near. But the first cock will speak, and another will argue back, and the fire will behave without sulks, and the hour will have passed without taking more than it took already. You settle onto the straw, with the care of a man laying down a rule. You pull the warmest breath under your cloak, and share it once more with the next set of lungs. The cap comes down, the goat sighs, the bowl waits, the rag shines, the fire keeps its end of a new bargain. You close your eyes not to sleep hard, but to float, mending the thin places in your plan with the thin thread of rest you can afford. It returns like a sulk made of weather. The downdraught pushes its thumb back down the hood, and the cottage fills by degrees with a smoke that is not the friendly blue-smelling veil you've half made peace with, but a low grey slab that sits at shoulder height and lowers with every minute you hesitate. Your eyes sting as if you've been scolded. Your tongue tastes like an old spoon. The goat coughs a small, astonished cough, then decides she meant to do that and settles herself with a pretense of dignity. The child whimpers once and burrows into the wool. The old man's chest rasps like a file drawn over iron. You kneel side on to the hearth, never front, on never to sweat and chill and study the fire's mood. It isn't dead. It's wrong. The flames creep flat along the wood, licking out instead of up, starved of the polite little rivers of air that make a home for fire in a well-behaved night. If you rake too boldly, you will scatter sparks. If you starve it with more ash, it will go sullen and leave you with black teeth until morning. The door tempts you, the way an argument tempts a tired man. Blow it all open. Clear the air. Take the consequences later. Crack the door. Just a finger. How much harm can one finger do? You picture the cold scything in the rush that turns embers into wild eyes, the smoke blown back into the room by a capricious swirl, the heat you've banked, leaking away in a minute, what took hours to coax and hoard. You see the goat dart for the gap, because goats have a theology of opportunity. You close your hand on the latch and keep it shut. Not yet. First, you tame what you can tame. You pull the top ash aside with the poker until the red heart shows itself, no grand excavation, just a window the size of your palm. You lay a lattice of true dry splints, stuff that snaps without argumenta. Mercy saved from last summer under the eaves. No green wood, no smoky peat yet. This hour wants obedience. You purse your lips and breathe a thin, steady thread of warmed air, not a gale across the glow. The flame answers by degrees, like a child bribed with a story. It stands, then coughs, then crawls obliged but offended. The wind presses again and the smoke sags. You need to cheat the draft, and you need to do it without paying the price in heat. Somewhere in the kitchen basket, there is a stub of rushlight, the pith of a rush dipped in tallow, miserly and grubby. You find it by touch, notch it in a split stick, steal one honest kiss of fire from the ember, and hold the little orange tongue up beneath the hood's mouth. Warm air rises, yes, and flues remember their manners when coaxed. You keep your sleeve tight to your wrist so you don't open a chimney of cold down your arm. You hold steady while tallow drools on your knuckles and burns with the smell that says animal and candle in the same breath. Slowly, stubbornly, the smoke changes its mind. Not away, not up and gone, but up enough to buy you a breath that doesn't hurt. You make the breath cave for yourself and for the old man, both cloak pulled over mouth and nose, breathe in, breathe out. Warm the air before you own it. His cough eases from iron to wicker. Good, he says, which is to say, keep going. The child's hair smells of smoke and wool fat. You stroke once through the cap to show the night you're not frightened of it, even if you are. And still the slab lowers by a hand's breadth. You weigh the choice with the slow scales that live behind the eyes. Choke a little and keep the heat that will hold you through the hour when courage breaks. Freeze a lot and trade 5 clean breaths now for shivering that makes hands stupid and men careless and makes the old man's chest forget its work. You do not choose yet. You prepare to choose. You set the room like a stage. Iron out of the footpath. Chamber pot further where a stumble won't marry it to your shins. Kindling stacked in reach. Ash raked ready to smother any leap. Goat bribed with the last of the sweet straw, her ropier scrap of twine through a loop of sacking hitch to the leg of the table, so she won't make theology at the door. The ragwick still shines on the beam. The bowl takes its metronome of drips. You speak softly into the blanket that there will be a cold moment, and then the warm will return. The blanket makes no promise, but people do. Now and only now you try the purge. You bank the ember a whisper tighter, so a gust won't tease a spark free. You hold the rushlight in one hand and the latch in the other. Ready, you say, which is what you say when there's nothing tidy about what follows. The latch lifts. The door yawns a handspan. The world hits you like a slap. Air with edges. air that grabs the back of your throat and wrings it. The smoke runs at the gap in a scramble of grey. For 2 heartbeats, the fire flares flat, as if it would skitter across the floor, and then, because you counted and planned, and the wind is in the mood to agree, it stands up properly and reaches. Shut, you say, and the door returns to the post with a thud that belongs to houses that have done this more times than you ever will. The room says furious things about you for exactly 1 minute cold that sneaks up sleeves. The wool's heat abandoned like a bed let go too soon. You resist the urge to overfeed the fire in apology. 2 dry slips only. A breath. Another. The rushlight guttering at the hood's mouth until you pinch it dead with soot and thumb. Smoke thins from slab to veil. Air finds its old path. You relatch. You count your people, goat, child, old man, yourself. The cough returns, but in the ordinary way. You pass the small beer, and he takes a mouthful, and the line at his brow loosens. Your eyes track the room and make the old list again because the long hour breeds folly. Iron safe pot, far cap down, cloak dry shoes, pointing stone turned drip court. The straw whispers approval when you settle. You feel the cleverness itch in your hands, the little victory of having done a risky thing without paying for it. Don't get proud. Pride is how doors get opened a second time just for a moment. How a log goes on just to cheer us. How a blanket comes too close to the hearth for a quick dry. How a night that was hard becomes a night that is broken. You accept a thin haze. You accept a dampness you can catalogue and corral. You accept that the cleanest breath of all lies 50 miles away in summer. You learn in this hour why past people let smoke live with them. It kills small lives that want your blood. It seasons beams. It teaches you to squat and to squint and to share. It writes a low history on every rafter, a tar-black annal of winters survived. You will scrape it from your throat tomorrow and call it vile, and still you will thank it under your breath because you are still here to be ungrateful. The goat sighs an old lady sigh. The bowl plinks once, and then not for a while. The thatch utters a sleepy shuffle overhead, like a dog making its bed. You move the hot stone with your warmed rag and nudge it towards the coldest feet. The little grunt that answers you is a prayer answered in the language of toes. The fire keeps a sensible face. The fog outside presses its nose to the shutter and mists the seams. But the room is yours again, a little smoky, a little cross, but loyal. The choice is made, and you can own it, choke a little. Not unto harm, not unto drama, but enough to keep the heat that keeps the people. You will carry the taste until morning, and still, you will bless your own stubbornness when the hour before dawn comes and finds the hearth awake and the blankets not icy with lost courage. Sleep does not arrive as a gift. You meet it in a negotiation. You make the breath cave for yourself, and then for the old man again, because the hour insists. You pull the cap lower. You let your weight be borrowed by the straw and the bodies beside you. The dark settles no longer a slab, but a shawl. Somewhere outside, a fowl mutters in its dream. You close your eyes and tell your hands, not yet, not yet. They listen. The night loosens not by color at first, but by shape. The dark in the corner becomes a cupboard. The cupboard remembers it is a wall. The wall has a crack you could swear was a path yesterday, and is only a crack today. That is winter dawn here, not a spectacle, a concession. The fire holds its modest end of the bargain, a patient low glow under ash. Your breath steam is smaller than it was. The room somehow feels colder for hope. You sit up with the care of a person who knows that a blanket turned wrong side down is a damp oath you will regret. Cap down, cloak up, hands under the cloak until they become hands again, not stones. The rafters above you wear their own winter rhyme, like sifted flour where smoke has thinned, little ferns of ice that will weep later and trouble you again. You do not brush them, you note them. The roof tells you what the air is planning. Someone must go out. The pot must be emptied or the smell will lay claim to the day. The woodpile once a visit dry splits inside now, save smoke and sulks later. And the thatch needs a knock. Last night's thaw and refreeze have pasted a slab of snow to the eaves. It will either come down when it chooses and break a neck, or come down when you tap and bruise your shoulder if you stand foolishly. Best make it your choice. You plan before you move. The latrine is 20 paces by the hedge, a seat over a hole, if you're lucky, a midden if you're not. The wood is stacked under a lean-to by the pigsty, a promise and a lie in equal parts. The roof pole leans just inside the door, a stripped sapling with a knot at the end, the cottage's winter scepter. You rehearse quietly, pot out and over tilt and rinse with a handful of snow set aside. Knock the eaves from the hinge post side. Fetch 2 armfuls of the driest splits. Back in. Latch. Breathe. You do your hands first. No bravado bar skin sticks to iron, and punishment comes free. Woolen mitts if there are any, or lengths of rag tied with cord about palms and wrists. Keep the fingers mostly together, fists within the wool make their own weather. You use the cloak's edge as a scarf and pin it across your mouth and nose with a wooden peg. Air that would knife your throat becomes a grievance you can bear after 1 breath or 2. A second cap under the hood if you have it. If not, pull the one you have down until it argues with your eyebrows. The door latch is iron, your hand is not. You wrap the latch with a strip of cloth before you touch it, and you thank last year's careful self for having left it there. The door will stick, because everything honest sticks at this hour. You brace with your hip lift, and open only as far as your plan requires. No interested goat. No adventurous child. The gap is yours, and then it is closed again behind you with a thud that says, "Be quick." Outside is a new world with the old one underneath. The air makes a clean, thin sound in your nose. Your lashes grit with frost on the second blink. The yard is slick where yesterday's drip met last night's knife. Your boots find straw you scattered last evening good. You thank your past self a second time. Breath hangs above the threshold like a ghost that doesn't want to follow. The horizon is the color of pewter rubbed with cold fingers. You deal with the pot first because it offends and because you have it in your hand. Away from the door, always awayest near the threshold, is a treachery that repeats, and no one wants to skate a chamber pot. You tip into the middens, lip rinse with a scoop of clean snow, and set the pot on its side where the sun, such as it is, can think about it later. You do not linger at the hedge. The latrine's seat is a bite. You keep your cloak down about your ankles and your knees together, not for modesty so much as to keep the world out. The old trick is to breathe into your cloak before you sit and hold that pocket of warm air near your middle as if it were as precious as bread. It is. The roof knock is the danger with manners. You collect the pole and you stand where the gable makes a path for falling snow to slide past you, not into you. Always the hinge post side first. If the slab leaps, it will leap away from the latch and not jam your way back in. You test the thatch with the polier firm tap, not a prod, and listen. Snow talks. The hollow sound means crust over powder. The dull means soaked and heavy. You begin at the eaves and work upwards, tapping in a line and then stepping back, pole out to take the weight if the roof decides to shrug. When it goes like a beast hole discontented, eager to flatten the unwary. It sloughs off with a thump that shakes the yard and sends a wave of cold air up your cloak. You lean with it, not against, and it misses you by the width of a prayer. You tap again less now, then a line near the corner where the wind piled it like a grudge. You leave the topmost snow if it clings like stubbornness, better a cap that insulates than a bald, wet, freezing roof. Your hands have begun to forget themselves. That is the moment to go for wood, because it gives you the kind of work that warms without bragging. The lean-to's mouth is rimmed with haw that looks like a good idea and behaves like glass. You break the crust with the pole first, then duck. Choose by sound and by habit, seasoned splits, knock together with a note like a bowl. Green wood makes a dull clack and promises smoke and argument. You stack 2 armfuls tight against your chest under the cloak's wing so you keep the load close to your heat. Do not show the yard your sleeves. The yard will take what it sees. You have the urge now, of course, to hurry. That's when people fall. You place each foot on the straw islands you made yesterday and add a new scatter where the path goes hungry. If you slip, fall small side-on wood to chest. Do not fling your arms, wide shoulders tear and mitts come off, and then you'll count to 9 all spring. You do not test the latch with bare wool. You use the cloth-wrapped hand you kept for iron. Inside again is a joy you are not allowed to say aloud because it sounds like pride. The door thuds shut. The latch finds its seat. You stand to one side in case the roof has thoughts. It fumes and drops a smaller sheet. You are for once faster than weather. Do not go to the fire yet. That is the hardest instruction and the most important. Numb hands lied to you even before your century. If you thrust them at the flame, they will burn you without telling your brain until the skin blisters. You go to the old way hands under your cloak, into your armpits, into the warm of your ribs where your heart does honest work for you. Breathe into the wool cave you made at your chin. Let that warm find your fingers, then open and close them until each finger remembers its name. Only then the hearth. Only then the modest present you put on hot iron a palm, held above, not on the hood's lip, to take the kindness without seeking punishment. You set the wood as if you have spare one split to catch a second to promise none for boasting. The room approves with a shift you can feel more than see. The goat tells you a story of neglect and then forgives you because you smell of outside and interesting fears. The old man takes the pot's return with a nod that could also be sleep. The child's hair has flattened into stripes from the cap and makes them look like a small badger. You smile in a mouth that still tastes of iron. Your fingers tingle back. You do not rub them as if trying to erase the cold that tears skin and invites chilblain. You coax them. You put your palms against the mug of small beer for its now virtuous warmth, or against the side of the pot where the pottage starts its morning low mutter. You feel the pins and needles as a bill being paid in small coin. You accept it. There is a moment now when you will be tempted to be generous. The world outside was a thief. The instinct is to repay it with a good blaze and loud relief. Resist. The day is long. Your fuel is not. The lesson holds the fire you are proud of at 7 is the cold that scolds you at 3. Keep the flame modest and get breakfast to the point where it can be left to mind itself. You notice the rafters again. The rime is thicker above the hood and thinner near the door. It will fall in faint powders when the room warms and make everyone look a little haunted for an hour. You tilt your head and see where the drip wick you set at midnight has frozen at its tip. A little clear droplet paused in the act of being troublesome. You thumb it off and feel clever in a small, permissible way. Your fingers answer when you ask them to make a fist. You count quietly because the old joke is a test. 1, 2, 3, 4 thumb. The other hand. 1, 2, 3, 4 thumb. 10. You have brought them all home. The room smells of smoke and survival. Outside the yard is a neat field of your competence and your luck. It will try you again tomorrow, and you will meet it again tomorrow, because that is the religion here plan: do, mend, repeat. You settle the blanket over the child, with the dry side down and the warm side proud. The old man's breath has found its rhythm, a tired metronome. You feed the goat a twist of straw and accept her criticism as a form of love. The fire has learned its morning manners. The thin light at the shutter is a little thicker now. Morning doesn't arrive, it relents. The light at the shutter fattens from pewter to thin milk, and the cottage admits it is day whether it likes it or not. Second sleep has stitched the night's thin places together as best it could. The embers are glowing like old coins, the hot stone is sulking rather than helping, and your mouth tastes faintly of smoke and iron. This is when a day is saved or squandered. Breakfast is not an event, it is repair. The pottage on the hook answers a cautious stir with a tired burp barley cabbage stem, last night's pork ghosting through the broth. A single heel of black bread sits by the hearth as if guarding the pot. You shave it, not slice it, thin curls that soften faster and make the illusion of more. A little pinch of salt because salt is wages you haven't earned yet. Small beer goes warm in a cup by the fire. You share it round rather than gulp. The old man gets the first dips of the pot. His cough took something from him in the night, and you give it back spoon by spoon. The child blinks, chews solemnly, and becomes a person again. The goat is scandalized by how long breakfast is taking and tells you so. You keep one eye on the leaven pot yesterday's, scrap of dough saved under a cloth. It is sluggish from the cold, a sulky pet. You coax it with a breath of warm and a spoon of coarse flour, then tuck the bowl near, not too near the fire. If it wakes in an hour, you'll have a loaf. If it sulks all morning, you'll have ash cakes. Either way, flour is not to be wasted on bravery. The oven will want attention. In a poor house, it is a small clay dome grafted onto the hearth mouth, like a grin you don't entirely trust. The night's damp has crept into its bones. The flue is in a mood to scold you with smoke. You ready a faggot of true dry twigs hazel, if luck smiled last summer, and one split of seasoned wood. No green, no peat, today you want heat without argument. You steal a live ember with the tongs and bed it under the faggot. The rushlight trick helps. A little tongue of fire licks the twigs until they remember what they are. Smoke slinks out and tests your patience. Then the fire catches and the oven begins to think itself a sun. You feed it only a little at a time, enough to heat the clay, not blacken it to no purpose. You watch for the old sign when the soot on the domes inside turns from black to white, the oven is ready. It is a slow conversation. You spend it tending other things. Water first. The bucket in the corner is a pond with a lid. A skin of ice has taken it in the night and held on with both hands. You crack it with the back of a spoon, and the cold fumes up and takes your breath away. That will do for scrubbing, but not for the kettle or the day. You will need the well. Layer up again cap, down cloak pinned wool about your wrists, and mind the iron. Bare fingers and metal are old enemies. You knot a strip of cloth round the bucket's handle. Take the windlass rope in the other hand and wedge the latch with your hip so the door obeys you and only you. Outside is brittle and honest. Each breath writes a short letter in the air and then tears it up. The well has a snow cap like a bishop. You knock it politely with the pole and set the lid aside just enough to work. Never all the way children and goats have theology about holes. The mouth is rimmed with haw. You scrape it clean so the bucket won't skate. Down below is black water with a glass lid. You use the ice iron, really a bar with a point to break a star-shaped hole. You can trust a foot across, not meaner. Ice broken too small freezes back like a grudge, too big, and the bucket slops and punishes. You lower slow, listening for the kiss and the glug, and you do not let your skin touch the rope. Wool between you and every claim the cold can make. Haul hand over hand, elbows close back straight. Pride makes haste. Haste makes a wet sleeve. A wet sleeve makes trouble. A yoke across your shoulders. If you have one, makes you clever. 2 pails sit low and steady. Less slosh, less spill. Wrists spared. If not, you keep the load hugged to your belly, under the cloak's wing so the village doesn't drink your heat. Back indoors you pour with a hand that remembers it's yours. The kettle thanks you with a first mutter. The oven is near ready soot whitening heat, bleeding from the mouth. You rake the coals to the lip with the long iron. The oven sighs as if it has finally remembered its part. The floor inside will scorch bread if you're careless. You tie a rag to a stick, dip it in the bucket, wring it so it won't drip treachery, and swab the oven floor with a quick, decisive sweep. Steam bursts out and bites your wrists. You have the cloth on them for a reason. The dome breathes sweeter now. You pull the rag free and hang it where it can think about its behavior. The dough has roused, not proudly but enough. You turn it out and knead with the heels of your hands. Not your fingertips. Fingers are traitors when cold and will tear skin to please a loaf. A little flour on the board, not much. Work it until it stops sulking and starts to answer. The room warms by a hair while you do this. Bodies make their own small weather. You shape the loaf, slash it once for luck and once for steam, and set it on the peel. The peel is a long, thin promise with a handle like a rhodogane cloth between you and the grain-slick wood, lest your palms sweat and freeze. Slide quick, confident. Doubt dumps a loaf at the mouth where it will burn for theatre and feed no one. The door brick goes on. The oven hums to itself like a priest at a psalter. Cold tools are next because they keep their grudges until you respect them. Wood for later must be split now while your shoulders have something like courage. You set the billet on a chopping block, not the earth. Earth steals the axe's bite and throws iron back at your shins. You stand square, not proud, and you aim the cut where the grain suggests, not where your pride does. One clean strike is how you keep blood inside. When the blade clings halfway, you do not argue with it. You turn the billet and persuade it with the second lower cut. The axe is wrapped in a rag near the eye so your hand doesn't kiss iron by mistake. The haft is rubbed with a smear of tallow and a pinch of ash so it won't slide and ask a price. You count your strokes, not to boast, but to pace your strength. Frost takes from you quietly. You'll want some left when the sun is a rumor at noon. The billhook trims kindling and makes faggots honest. You always cut away from the leg you plan to keep. You don't bare a knee to save a minute. Old men with scars will show you why. The shovel for the ash is colder than it looks. You keep your hand on the wood and let the metal be a mouth that never quite eats. You clear the hearth's edges so a spark will find nothing friendly. You check the goat's trough and the icy lip at its rim. You break the crust with the mattock and drop fresh water from the bucket. Then lift the bucket away so a careless horn won't make a winter lake where the hearth used to be. Back inside, you visit the oven with the anxious love of a parent at a cradle. The crust has risen and is thinking of color. Smoke from the dome's mouth is thin and well behaved. You turn the loaf with a quick peel twist so the side near the fire doesn't strut while the far side sulks. A minute more. 2, if the clay says so. The child has found their voice and is telling the goat a secret. The old man is asleep sitting up, which is a kind of wisdom. The kettle remembers it has a job and begins to talk. You look at your hands red at the knuckles skin, like old paper, all 10 fingers present and accounted for. You rub a smear of tallow into the cracks so they don't split into stings that swear at you all day. You do not warm your hands over the steam. That is another little liar's trick. The damp will own you when you go back out. The loaf comes out with a sound like a foot tapping a floorboard. You lift it, knock the bottom. Hollow is a sermon about heat done right. The smell is nearly a feast by itself, sour and sweet smoke and hope. You put it on a slatted trivet, not the bare board so air can go round, and the crust won't weep itself into leather. The room briefly feels rich. There are still chorizo path to straw a hinge to oil with a smear of goose fat. a snag in the shutter cord to mend before it steals a whole day later. But you have beaten the morning's first tests. The well gave you water and not a soaking. The oven gave you bread and not a drama. The tools did work and didn't take blood for pay. That is how a winter day begins, with small, sharp mercies you coaxed into happening. You leave while the light is still guessing. The hearth has behaved. The loaf is cooling. The old man's cough has settled into a rhythm that sounds like someone ticking off a list. Now the lane calls a string of frozen ruts stitched between brittle hedges, and the work that keeps a house alive must go out of the door and face the weather. You dress not for heroics, but for honesty. Linen, close wool, over another wool, over that cloak pinned high, so water runs off you and not into you. Mitts of rag tied at the wrist, Patton's wooden overshoes strapped under your boots so the frozen mud's claws don't own you. A staff in your hand to test what looks like ground and sometimes isn't. The cap comes down until it argues with your eyebrows. The hood goes up because wind thinks your ears are fair game. What you carry is modest and awkward. A sack of grain for the mill slung in a back basket with the tump line over your forehead, so the load sits on bone, not all on muscle. A little wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth, a twist of onion, a slice of last night's bread, your dinner if the world refuses to hurry. In the crook of your arm, a bundle of kindling and one split log. You learned last winter that even the friendliest hearth can be sulky when you arrive. And at your belt, a short tally and a bit of chalk to remember what you swap for what you keep. The goat bleats like betrayal when you leave. The child waves with a solemnity that makes you promise yourself you'll come back with all 10 fingers again. The lane is a gallery of mistakes other people made. A cart has chewed it into grooves that freeze thaw and freeze again into traps with polished sides. You walk on the crown where the mud rises proud and the ice is at least honest. Where the crown sinks to a glassy trough, you step onto the verge and let the hedge's thin branches brush your shoulder. Nettles are sleeping now, and the thorns that remain are winter's handwriting on your cloak. Your staff is the cleverest thing you own this morning. A touch ahead to find the dark, that means water, and the white that means whore. A thud to test a puddle's promise. A prod to wake a slumped gate whose latch freezes and forgets its job. The air smells of iron and old apples. Fields hold their breath, stubble bristling like a bad haircut under skim ice. In the distance, a church bell tests itself and clears its throat. That's a line you can follow when the fog thinks to play games. Finger posts are a modern vanity. Your waymarks are hedgerow oaks and a stone cross tilted by generations of ox carts. The mill's plume of frozen mist when the wheel turns. The bark of a dog that knows which yard is his. The miller in this part of the world takes his multure, his bite of your grain as his due. In summer, you take grudges against the handful he keeps back. In winter, you take grace where it's offered. Sometimes the wheel is locked into ice, the mill race a glass rope, the pond itself a floor. Today the stream mutters under skin. The wheel turns sullenly with a squeal that sounds like a complaint made in Latin. You stamp your patterns on the threshold to leave the lane outside. The mill smells like wet flour, wood shavings. and the old sweat of men who have lifted more than is sensible for longer than is kind. You keep your manners around the miller. His scales are honest if you look like you're paying attention, less so if you turn your head to sneeze. You shoulder your sack to the bin, spill the grain in, and watch the first meal cloud like winter sun through glass. He takes his toll in plain sight. You mark your tally notches against bone and tuck it away. Conversation is short and practical. The wheel is sulking. The river took a goose the week past. Someone's pig broke through the ice and had to be hauled out with a rope and 3 men swearing at once. You hand him a stick of kindling as a courtesy. He offers you a sip of ale as if it were an accident. The path to market is meaner. You choose it because bread must be traded for salt and salt for sense. The road is a run of frozen ruts, then a plank bridge with hoar-bearded rails over a brook that gossips under ice. You test each plank with the staff and cross light-footed, not because you can, but because you must. A man fell through last year when the thaw lied. He went home alive and lost 3 toes to prove it. Market is the closest thing winter has to heat. The bakehouse smokes, the alehouse hums a brazier, throws up a stingy glow, while hands gather above it like moths that learned manners. Barter is the language, a skein of coarse thread for a paper of pins, a clutch of eggs if the hens can be coaxed, a smear of tallow traded for a candle, and a promise to bring back the stub. At the saltman's stall, you feign disdain at his price, and he feigns surprise at yours, until both of you are satisfied that you have tried and the salt changes hands. The Reeves man lurks with an eye on measures. A size of bread and ale still bites even when the cold tries to take the teeth out of law. You don't sell bread today. You're buying room for bread to taste like something tomorrow. You keep to the quiet edge of the square and the quick end of talk. Lingering breeds cold. You chew your cheese and bread with your back to the wind and your face to a wall that remembers sunlight. A woman with a basket of rushes offers you a handful for your rushlight pot. You swap for kindling and both of you pretend it was generous. Someone mentions wolves as they always do when they want to feel old-time brave and won here, not now. The fear is older than the fact and warms the mouth like spice. You nod and check your tally with your chalk salt pins, a needle, a twist of flax, the price of a leak of oil you will rub into the door latch so it stops shrieking like a lost soul at bedtime. Weather changes its mind as quick as a reeve changes his story. The light flattens to tin. A flurry starts like an apology and becomes policy. Sleet is worse than snow sharp as grammar and twice as petty. You pull the cloak's edge down over your brow, pinch tight under your chin so it doesn't pour itself down your neck. The staff tests and approves each step. The world beyond the next hedge goes soft and then softer. Your landmarks slide 1 inch to the left and look like strangers. This is why bells matter. You angle yourself until the church's voice is a hand on your shoulder, not a whisper behind your ear. In fog sound is a road. Do not hurry. Sweat now is an enemy that waits until you turn home into a freeze on your skin. Walk like a man with a full cup. When the sleet takes the lane and polishes it to malice, step into the field edge and follow the hedge where the ground is lumpy and honest. If the wind veers to your back and tries to own your cloak, unpin it and hold it at your breast like a baby. A cloak makes a fine sail when it wants to drown you in a ditch. If a cart comes rare today, give it the whole road. The driver's fingers are as numb as yours, and the wheel is loyal only to ruts. There is a place halfway home where a coppice throws a shoulder against the weather. You stand there 5 stolen minutes back to bark face inside your own hood, breathing the small warm world you carry with you. You do the finger count without looking because habit saves hands. 1, 2, 3, 4 thumb. 1, 2, 3, 4 thumb. The prickle means blood is honest. If a finger is witless and waxy, you don't scold it. You put it in your armpit and wait until the world returns. The lane remembers you and tries its tricks again. You remember your mourning and refuse. Crown for crowns, hedge for glass, staff for pride. The plank bridge has found a new treachery, a sheen. Where earlier there was only frown, you go around through the ford's shallows because wet wool is better than broken bone. And anyway the ford is talking, the sound water uses when it means to help if you mind your feet. You come out with boots that swear at you, but will forgive once you are back by the hearth. Home is a door that opens at the first knock because you wrapped the latch and kept the hinge honest. Inside is smoke you know by name. The child counts your fingers with a ritual seriousness that would shame a priest. The goat sniffs your cloak and decides the market cheated you. The old man eyes the salt and the pins with approval. Small goods look like victory in winter. You lay the staff by the door, lean the kindling, and put your body back into the little climate the cottage has made with stubbornness and ash. You've brought the world home in bits and bargains, and it has not stolen a bit from you today. The sleet scrabbles at the shutter. The fire makes a sound like agreement. The loaf on the board has a song in its crust when you tap it. It is enough. Noon arrives without warmth, only a clearer kind of cold. The sleet has tired of its own spite and moved on. What it leaves behind is the quiet creeping enemy that outlasts blizzards damp. It sits in the rafters like a thought no one wanted. It softens leather frets, wool, sours, tempers, and if you let it, eats a winter's work without ever showing teeth. You start with the beasts because they're the honest clock that tells you what matters. The goat has thumped her patience thin on the stall board. You answer with hay that is not too rich. Bloat has a way of turning victory into a funeral and a fist of straw fresh underfoot. Her trough wears a new rimcrack skim refill and lift the bucket away before a careless horn makes a lake where the hearth ought to be. The hens look outraged by the entire concept of weather. You scatter grain into the dry end of the byre and rake yesterday's droppings towards the midden in a tight barrow that squeaks disapproval but goes nevertheless. A dust of fireplace ash over the floor keeps the ammonia from biting eyes and lungs. A pinch under the hens perches offends lice enough to make them move house. Back inside, you treat damp as a campaign, not a complaint. Doors stay shut, yet air must change or the cottage will sweat itself into mold. You prize the shutter a finger, no more the breath. Gap you made last night with cloth and scents counts slowly to 20, while the smoke behaves then close and pin. The little purge lets the room trade steam for something sharper without throwing your heat to the sleet's memory. You do it again on the quarter hour when the kettle sighs and the pottage mutters. Ritual outwits rot. You look up. The thatch has wept along the beam again. Your ragwick is shining with good work. You wring it into the bowl, hang it back like a tongue, and set a second at the next drip's path. Better to name the water than pretend it isn't there. The rafters wear hoar where the smoke thins. You resist the satisfying brush that would send a flurry down into your drying clothes. Let it wait. You will choose the moment and not the frost. Now the mending. Winter is the season of confession for threadbare things. You set a stool by the hearth, but not in front of it. Sweat is the tailor's enemy. Lay out the days, triage hose with heel as thin as a whisper. A tunic elbow turned to lace by honest work. A mitten that pretends not to be 2 fingers short. You wax your thread with a smear of beeswax so it slips without soaring. You thread the bone needle with eyes that have learned to squint through smoke. Darning eggs are for lucky households. You use a smooth pebble warmed in your pocket. A neat lattice over the heel warp laid one way weft the other saves a sock that has walked as far as anyone ought in frozen ruts. A patch on the elbow, not pretty, but placed with the grain so it moves with the arm and not against it. Leather boot latchets get a new lace of thong cut from a scrap. You rub tallow into the stitching so the thread doesn't wick water and die an honorable death for no reason. Damp eats cloth from the edge inwards. You turn garments inside out to find the grey bloom before it becomes a smell that can't be persuaded. A smoky house has a virtue. The rafters cure cloth the way they cure ham. You run a drying rail to poles, resting in forked hooks from wall to wall above head height, so heat and smoke climb into sleeves and hems. Not too close. Wool is dear and fire stupid. Pegs are strips of hazel slit and sprung. They grip without teeth. The trick is rotation, wet to warm, warm to different warm, nothing staying long enough to weep onto its neighbor. Floor rushes sprinkled with dry sand drink little puddles where boots stood. You sweep the grit to the threshold before it becomes a paste that grinds leather to misery. Hands now skin like old paper at the knuckles, scores from axe shuttle and frost. Tallow stinks of honesty. You warm a pea of it in your palm and work it into the splits so the next chore doesn't write its name in blood. Lanolin from raw fleece does the same job and keeps a spinner's hands from cracking when the day turns to wool, which it does because winter indoors is not idleness, it is miles of yarn. You fetch the basket, teased locks of last year's, shearing some clean, some still confiding secrets of hedge and field. You card the wooler pair of paddles with wire teeth if you have them. A dog comb and patience if you don't until the fibers lie more or less in the same dream. The distaff takes a bundle tied with a rag and you draw with a sure, slow hand twist with a drop spindle that has a wooden whirl like a small moon and let the weight and your fingers make a bargain between chaos and string. Twist to the right wind on twist again. The cottage hums to the small, soft sound of work that will remember you in summer as cloth and in autumn as warmth. If you're grand, you own a great wheel and walk backwards like a conjurer. If you're ordinary, you spin and step and breathe in smoke that keeps moths from seeing the future in your yarn. Spinning talks to damp. Greasy fleece gives back to your hands what the weather tries to steal. Yarn that dries near the hood takes a temper that weaves without snarling. You tie off a length skein it round your forearm, and elbow count turns nod at the arithmetic that has made civilization more than once, and hang it near the rail to rest. A spool of twine comes of the coarser bits. Twine mends fences and pays for mistakes. Between chores, you mind the bread you drew from the oven earlier. The heel you saved is supper's promise. The middle slice thin is noon's mercy. You spread it with dripping, if the last slaughter was kind, or with nothing, if the month has been honest and lean. The old man eats slowly, like a man courting sleep. You make him a cup of hot, small beer, warmed over the embers with a pinch of whatever herb didn't die in the frost time if fortune smiled when you tucked the garden to bed. The child shares a corner with the cat and tells the goat secrets through a crack in the door, as if words have warmth. Tools want attention before they turn on you. The axe haft gets a rub with ash and fat to keep it from slipping. The knife, a few thoughtful licks on the stone-sharp blades are safer than sulking ones. The hinge on the shutter pouted all morning. A smear of goose grease shuts it up without a shout that would wake the village at curfew. You tidy the woodpile by the hearth with more sense than pride. Logs end first kindling in a faggot tied with a rush. No showy pyramid, just reachability when the long dark starts making hands forgetful. Damp still. You hear it in the way the blanket sighs when you lift it. You smell it in the wool that was clean and now thinks it is a pond. You fight it with everything the cottage knows. Heat modest and constant. Smoke behaving but present. Gaps pinned, not gaping. Cloth lifted high. Straw renewed before it ferments into a sulk. You lift the palliasse at one end and prop it with a stool so air can nose along the underside. Stale warmth underneath becomes air that has somewhere else to be. You lay the hot stone on a flagged patch to drive wet out of the floor where boots always land. You do not set it on wood because wood has opinions when warmed in one spot for too long. Tempers thin at bitter noon. You keep yours with work and with little clevernesses. A counting song while you spin own sheep. 2 sheep 3 for the Lord. 4 for the tithe. 5 for the market. 6 for the child keeps, hands moving, when minds would rather bite. A story about a saint who warmed a village by praying into a loaf convinces nobody and still does everybody good. A riddle for the child makes the minutes behave. The old man snores once like a saw hitting a nail and then finds rhythm again. By the time the kettle asks to be noticed, the room has gone from wet to less wet, which is victory of a sort. The rail is loaded, but not groaning. The rafters are beaded, but not crying. The hearth is doing the plain miracle of before and after. You sip what is mostly warm water with a memory of ale and call it restorative. You fold the patched hose and put them near the child's cap and mitts, so the evening finds them ready. You slide a new wedge under the table's leg that wobbled. A winter of wobble is how tables die of foolishness. Damp is not defeated. It never is. It is kept in its place by the kind of attention that looks small from a distance and saves a household when tall tales have gone to sleep. You've made your bargains with smoke cloth flame and breath. You've kept beasts fed tools. honest cloth useful skin, mostly whole, and temper from curdling. That is what noon yields in a medieval winter, if you do it right. Not comfort, but control. Outside, the light is already thinking about retreat. The hedge throws a longer shadow. The lane looks like a promise you'll have to keep again soon. You stack the last of the dry splits by the hearth, lift the bread heel, and listen to the wind decide its next trick. The day thins again, trickster that it is. A shard of sun slides along the shutter and pretends at warmth. But the room says otherwise. Breath shows the goat stamps, the loaf's cut face toughens if you stare at it too long. Mid-afternoon in winter is the sly turn too late to start something grand, too early to put your feet up, and it is when the weather likes to change its mind whilst you're looking away. You plan like a quartermaster. Night wants water fuel and feed lined up where sleepy hands can find them without a hunt. You fetch the spare pails from under the bench and feel the old reluctance in your back. The well is closer than the stream and safer than the ford. So the well it is again. Before the freeze makes a lid, you'll curse at midnight. Cap down cloak, pin the rag on the latch, check twice. The yard is a crunchy ledger of your own footprints, from the morning crisped hard. The well's lid has grown a fine beard of hoar. You shave it with the pole and set the timber aside so it cannot slide. The hole is a dark pupil in a white eye. You break the skin with the ice iron in 3 clean stars. Too small a hole heals in a sulk. Too large steals heat from the rest. The rope is stiff and mean with cold. The bucket's mouth a ring of knife. Cloth between you and iron always. Lower slow. Listen for the quiet kiss and the belly of the glug haul hand over hand without jerks that set the water slapping and icing at the rim. 2 full pails come up with a complaint. You stand them together under the eaves where a drift has been cleared. Bodies keep heat, even buckets. A third, if the shoulders agree, night is long and tea is not yet a thing. The yoke would make you clever. Without it, you take the tiring way, 1 in each hand, and the staff in the crook of your elbow to keep your feet honest. Inside again, you decant 1 kettle, 1 wash pail, 1 pot for the animals. Lids on to keep the room from drinking what you worked to fetch. Fodder next. The goat lives on a calendar you don't write. She knows when the hay ought to arrive and writes letters to complain when it doesn't. You've a small hayrick under the lean-to, its thatch patched with whatever the hedge offered in the autumn. You cut only what you must. Winter is petty with sums, and the last weeks are always worse than the first. A truss for tonight tied with a twist of rush. A smaller one for dawn. You shake each forkful, so the dust and seeds fall outside. Dust makes coughs. Seeds tempt mice. Mice bring cats. Cats test your patience and the cheese alike. From the clamp by the hedge, you pull 2 small roots, fodder beet or turnip mud frozen to a rind. You knock them together to shed the worst of the field, split them with the billhook, and set them in the byre as a treaty offering. The goat forgives you with a mouthful of evidence. Kindling is now or not at all. When dusk comes, hedges turn into ideas. Brambles grab and leave their signature on your shins. You take your staff and the hook, and you walk the boundary, where the lane's hedge meets the stubby copse. Deadfall is a polite way of saying, other people's wood you're still allowed to touch. You collect what the wind has already taxed. Thumb-thick twigs, finger-thin slivers, the frail grey dead that snaps with a clean report. Never rip from live. Green wood is a smoky argument you lose. A flitch of bark from a standing birch looks like temptation, leave it be. You aren't a thief, you're a guest of winter. You bind the thin stuff into faggots with rush or withies. Quick knots, tails tucked, so they don't snag on every old sin the hedge remembers. Your eye sorts by purpose splinters to waken embers, sticks to lift flame to the next meal. A couple of longer splits to bridge the night between the embers, coaxing and the modest blaze that follows. You feel clever enough to stop and then feel wiser and add one more bundle future you can swear at you later for the backache or thank you for the warmth. You choose your future you. Rushes will pay twice if you handle them kindly. The floor wants them and so do the lamps. Not the great brown cigar heads of the bulrush, you call them that here. Elsewhere their reed mace of those are tinder and stuffing and a child's distraction. Fine things all but not tonight's need. What you want is soft rush-thin green in summer papery now. Junkus if the reeve is listening. The pith inside is the candle of a poor house. You go to the ditch where the water crawls and the bank remembers being soft. Test the edges with your staff. Ice over mud is a liar twice. You cut standing rush with the hook, where it is dry at the foot, the stems crisp and keen to fall into your hand. The bundle is light as a promise. You tie it with itself and carry it under your cloak so the frost doesn't take back its loan. Peeling is a job for later. By the fire strip. Most of the greenskin leave a seam to keep the thing honest. Lay the pale pith to dry in the smoke. Then soak it in tallow or old bacon grease tomorrow, and you have a rushlight to boss the dark. For now, you merely bring them in before they become glass rods that snap when you need them most. All the while you read the sky, because it lies and tells the truth in another language. There's a ring round the sun, faint as if drawn with a wet finger ice, high up a halo that means more cold and often snow. Mare's tails, those fine wisps, high and westering air slipping over, and the wind has backed a point nose in round from a place it didn't come from this morning. Birds have gone lower into the hedge and are pretending to be berries. The robin is underfoot, which is not sentiment, but pragmatism. Smoke from your chimney won't go up without being pinned with a prayer. It hangs, then sulks, then drifts down the lane as if tired. Your ears feel the kind pressure change a small ache like a hat that's grown too honest. This is the hour of choices. You could push onto the far copse and bring back an armload that would make the evening easy. You could wade the ditch for better rush. You could be excellent. Excellence breaks ankles at this time of day. You choose adequacy with foresight, enough kindling to avoid pride, enough rush to keep a wick in a pot for 2 nights, enough hay to hush the goat and keep the buyer from smelling like false economy. You leave the rest for tomorrow, not because you are lazy, but because you intend to arrive at tomorrow. Back home, you behave like a porter with something to prove but a head that remembers lids and latches. You open the door no wider than your bundles demand. You do not let the goat make theological claims on the lane. Faggots to their corner by the hearth ends towards you, not a pretty fan to trip you at curfew. Rushes lofted on the drying rail above the hood. where smoke will teach them manners. Hay forked to the manger with the seeds shaken out on the midden side where the hens can tell you secret fortunes. Roots stacked on a shelf where the floors damp cannot climb into them. You keep the room's small weather in hand. The purge is a crack of shutter, whilst the fire behaves a breath of sharper air traded for the steam you've dragged home in your cloak and on the rush's skin. A sweep of the floor rushes with a whisk. Broom-dry sand sprinkled and gathered little puddles bullied out the door before they grow mold's small cities. The ragwick gets wrung and rehung. The drip bowl emptied where ash won't cry about it. The kettle thanks the extra water by remembering how to sing. The child wants to help. You give them the honor of counting faggots into 2 piles, now and night, and the equally serious task of plaiting 3 rushes together for the floor edge, where draughts like to misbehave. The old man eyes the sky through the shutter slat and says nothing. He has seen enough winters to know that nothing is a sentence. You pour him a thumb of warm beer and bring the mug to his hands until they notice it, then leave his dignity alone to decide how quickly to drink. You test the bread's heel with the thumb and decide it can be coaxed back to kindness. A slice near the fire, on a prong stick, turned and turned, a kiss of dripping, if you have it, a wipe of ale if you don't. The smell of toasted sour and smoke is the kind of trick that keeps a room together until curfew. When you step out one last time to shake the mat and look up, the sky has lost its human face. It's a sheet now, drawn tighter than it was, with a grain to it that says wood smoke upwards and snow downwards. The church bell tries a note and thinks better of it. Wind scrapes a hedge and changes mind. Your breath hangs closer to you, as if asking permission to stay. You feel that small, private click inside, the one that means right then, in. Night is already a rumour at the corners. You bring in the last of the dry, just 2 more sticks, because future you muttered, and lay the staff by the hinge. The latch cloth is where your hand expects it. The embers look ready to be translated into flame without sulks. The rushes will be half dry by bedtime, enough for a test wick if pride doesn't get ideas. The goat is chewing something that used to be a problem. The child has arranged the faggot piles into armies and demands a judgment. You appoint the smaller pile the elite and the larger the stalwart. The old man blinks at the halo around the door's crack as if reading a friend's letter and nods once. You have made your choices against a sky that was busy saying the opposite of comfort. They were modest, which is to say, wise. If the snow comes hard after curfew, you won't be pounding at a frozen latch with a bundle of wet sticks and a story. You'll be inside to hear the first sift of flakes against the thatch and to decide how to bank the fire so it lasts past midnight without boasting. Twilight slides in on felt soles. The light under the shutter thins to a greyer sort of grey, the kind that doesn't so much fail as withdraw its help. You can feel the village collecting itself, doors closing with the thud of wood that knows its frame, hens clucking into the arithmetic of roost, a dog deciding that barking is expensive and saving it for later. Somewhere beyond the hedge, the church bell tries one round note, then another, then falls into its evening work. Couvre-feu, it says, the old order to cover the fire, and you understand it properly now. Not smother, not pride, but prudence. You start with the last repairs while there's still enough mean light to tell thread from splinter. The shutter cord snag that annoyed you at noon becomes tonight's first victory. You re-hitch the loop with a short splice and rub in a smear of goose grease so it will pull smooth when hands are sleepy. A loose peg at the rail gets a wedge of off-cut tapped home. The rail will carry rushes and shirts without sulking. You check the door, baroque bowed by years, and set its notch so it will drop cleanly if someone pounds the plank at midnight with a silly tale. The latch cloth is exactly where your hand expects. You push the knot tighter as if tying a promise to your future self. The embers need translating into flame, but not a boastful one. You pull back the ash until the red core shows like a small town on a winter map. A ladder of kindling goes on, no drama, just thumb and finger stuff that snaps clean when bent. You breathe through the warmed cloth, a steady thread of air from your chest, and the orange deepens to white, then opens a flame that stands politely. A split stick bridges two smaller ones, so the fire learns to climb before it can wander. You hold back from the satisfying log that would flare and spend itself by the time the bell's voice is a memory. That sort of blaze buys a minute and sells the night. The oven's mouth is a little warm still. You let it hold a flat stone like a tame son, ready to put a crust back into bread that has gone sulky. The kettle moves from mutter to suggestion. The pottage freshened with a handful of chopped onion, and the heel of that loaf begins to smell like resolve. You lay the two faggot piles within easy reach, now to the left, night to the right, and tell the child their serious job is to remember which is which and to stop you if your hands forget. Neighbors call through at curfew because that is what people are for when the dark is bigger than any one door. You hear Rowan's tread first foot that drags slightly since the cart incident, and his knuckles rap twice as if reminding the wood who he is. You do not lift the bar, you lift your voice. We're in. You. His answer is the usual lie told kindly, warm as saints. He tells you in half sentences what matters. The lane by the ford is glass. Old Meg's roof shed its load and took her washing line with it. The Reeves pig is out again, and thinking about lawlessness near the manor's midden. If the snow comes hard, they'll bring a pole to your eaves at first light. You pass him a wedge of toasted bread in a cloth through the thumb's width crack. He returns your favor with a pinch of salt because he saw what you paid at market and because tomorrow is long. There's the familiar cough from Hester on the far side of the hedge. Her little ones, fever broke with the noon thanks bee, and the word goes round like a cup. The first sift of snow begins sooner than the ear thinks it will. It arrives as a change in noise, fewer edges, more hush. The thatch asks a small question of itself and shakes out a whisper. Tiny grains tap the shutter with a sound like moths learning to drum. You lift the latch, a finger to sniff the sky, and close it again. Cold reaches in like a debt collector. The bell spends its last strokes and leaves you to your own arithmetic. Now you set the room for siege. Water first. You fill 2 mugs and the kettle and cover the bucket with a board and a stone so the cat won't decide to learn swimming. The chamber pot goes to its far post, steady and humble. You set a fold of straw nearby for the spill you hope not to make. The hot stone returns to the hearth to drink what heat it can before bedtime. The rag for turning, it is tucked under your belt so you won't go hunting with numbed fingers later. The rag wicks gleam on their beams. The bowls below them are half full and patient. You empty, replace, and rehearse the movement until your hands can do it in the dark without your cleverness. Rushlight time. You take 3 of the stems you brought in at dusk, peel 2/3 of the green skin away in a long, shy curl. Leave the seam that keeps the pith whole. They lie pale and new on your palm like thin fish. You lay them on the rail above the hood to dry by smoke and gratitude. One that was cut in summer and stored now becomes tonight's test. You dip it in tallow, let it weep off its excess, and pinch a scrap of rag at the tip. When it takes fire, it burns with the small, steady arrogance of the poor, that stubborn inch of light that insists it is enough to thread a needle or read a psalm or find the spoon you kicked under the bench. You set the rushlight in its split-peg holder and plant it at the table's edge, where it will make work possible and disaster unlikely. Any lamp you own would be better and worse. Rushes ask little and give what they can. Clothes are lifted higher on the rail. Boots stand tongue out by the warm, not too close so the leather won't harden into a sulk. The palliasse gets a 2-finger lift at the head on a stool to let air nose under. A winter's worth of backache began with damp straw that no one saw. The child's mitts go on the rail with a clothespin pinched from a hazel split. Your knife is set on the shelf above head height where sleepy hands can't meet it and make a foolish story. The axe stays by the door but behind the bar, head wrapped in a rag. You do not want to trip on iron on the hour you least deserve it. You share out watches. First waking will be yours, you take it because you've learned the embers mood. The old man, stubborn as church oak, claims the second and you let him, because pride is better than sulk in a body with years. The child is given an honor that is not a burden if the drip gets cheeky, wake someone. If the goat gets theological, wake someone. If your toes turn from you, say so. You say it like a secret pact, and they nod as if you have knighted them with a wooden spoon. The pottage is ladled with ceremony. Elder first, then the small, then you, then the goat, gets a peel scrape into her dish because peace with goats is good policy. The toasted bread becomes a treaty, thin sliced and walked round the bowl. You put a pinch of thyme from the winter jar into the steam, and the room smells briefly like a month that isn't this one. The old man eats and remembers a story about a bell that froze on the clapper. You listen as if it matters because his mouth needs the warmth of telling and your ears need the business of believing. The snow shows its hand. It isn't a storm yet, but it's practicing. The thatch sighs in small slumps and resets. Smoke behaves, sign the wind has decided to be dull rather than wicked, and the hood hums like a pot at rest. You draw the shutter tight, pin the hasp, and run your palm along the seam to feel for the thin line of draught. A twist of rag in the corner turns a wolf into a dog. You loop a rush plait under the door and tick it flatter with the heel of your hand. The bar lifts easily, drops cleanly, lifts again rehearsal until your muscles own the movement without your head. Before you let the day go, you make a little plain beauty because the night takes less from people who own something fine. You scratch a star and a crooked fish into the soot-blackened hood with a stick. The child adds a wobbly goat. The old man smiles without teeth and draws a bell. These will wash off with spring and live somewhere else in memory, which is the true currency in winter. Then you do the last quiet round. Poker laid cold side out, pot far, cap by your pillow, shoes pointing at the hearth, rag at hand, stone warming, faggots stacked, rushlights safe, watch agreed. You listen once more, the sift against the shutter, the goat's mouth working the problem of hay.